The chair now recognizes Ms. Crandall for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you regarding the Sudden Unexpected Death Data Enhancement and Awareness Act. The problems that the bill seeks to address were first made known to me through a very personal experience. I recall July 30th, 1997, as a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous summer day as I sat out on our front steps waiting to awaken my daughter Maria from her nap. She had her 15-month checkup scheduled for later that morning. But when I went to wake her in her crib, I found Maria not breathing and blue. I called 911 on speakerphone. I started CPR, and even though the police arrived immediately and care was intervened immediately, she was transported to the hospital. Heroic efforts, Maria could not be revived. My thriving, happy, walking, talking, beautiful little girl had died. We returned home from the hospital to find the police waiting for us with lots of questions and needing to investigate our home. A medical investigator from the ME's office called and came over the next morning to take pictures and ask many more questions, and asked me to replay the most horrific moment of my life, how I found my daughter. Over the next few days, it was all we could do to plan her funeral and try to keep ourselves going on. I had no idea that during those same days that the investigation of Maria's deaths was the most crucial. I did not know that what was and what was not done at that time would have such a lasting impact on myself and the rest of my family. It is not like TV. Nothing happens quickly, and questions don't get answered in an hour, if they ever do at all. 2 long years later, her investigation was concluded, and a cause for her death was never found. So I am left with the understanding that her true cause of death was buried with her, and that is a tragedy of missed opportunities that I live with. I do not want to see this happen for other families in the future. Sadly, my story is not unique. There are many bereaved families who could sit in this chair and tell you the same story of tragedy, inexplicable loss, and missed chances. In 2010 alone, over 3,600 infants and nearly 200 toddlers died suddenly and without explanation, and over 26,000 babies were lost to stillbirth. H.R. 669 efficiently addresses the core problems present in our country today to allow us to improve the collection of comprehensive and standardized information to better understand these presently inexplicable deaths. Regarding stillbirth, nearly half of the 26,000 are unexplained. Its surveillance is very limited when utilizing fetal death records, which are often incomplete and insufficient. However, a CDC-funded effort to gather richer data through some existing state birth defect surveillance programs has shown success. Education of healthcare providers and expectant families is also limited and needed to teach the importance of known prenatal health initiatives. In regards to infant and childhood deaths, coroner and medical examiner offices have the authority in our country to investigate all unexplained, unexpected, and suspicious deaths, and therefore the infant and child deaths that we discussed today fall under their purview. In this regard, it is very important to recognize that the death investigation systems in our country vary immensely, from state to state and often from county to county. Therefore, the investigations that parents encounter are directly tied to where they live and the resources and the policies which their local medical examiner or coroner office utilizes. The tracking of sudden unexpected infant death rates showed a significant drop in the early 1990s with the initiation of NICHD's successful Back to Sleep campaign. Unfortunately, we have not seen any additional progress in lowering those rates further. As shown in the CDC graph I submitted in my written testimony on page 8, I believe, our progress as a country has seen a plateau for more than a decade. And if we are committed to see a change and prevent more of these deaths in the future, we must make a change in our process. The medical legal death investigation of these cases needs to be standardized, they need to be resourced, and the resultant data centralized and specifically studied. The Sudden Unexpected Death Data Enhancement and Awareness Act addresses these critical limitations in order to provide answers to families as well as our nation overall. Specifically, it would improve the effectiveness of current activities of the CDC by removing the obstacles that impede their success today. This will be achieved by improving the surveillance of stillbirth by expanding on current programs, improving the surveillance of infant and child deaths by supporting comprehensive investigations, supporting evidence-based public awareness campaigns, and providing grief to families. Thank you for allowing me to provide my views on this important legislation, and on behalf of all the children gone too soon, my Maria being one of very many, thank you for giving them a voice. I know they would want us to know what happened to them and help create a future free of tragedies for others.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Crandall, I found your testimony very moving. H.R. 669 calls for the improvement of death scene investigations in the case of sudden unexplained death in childhood, including the collection of medical information, description of the sleep position, environmental factors. Would collecting this information significantly lengthen the time it takes to complete the current investigation?
No, and the guidelines currently exist for scene investigations through the CDC were first created in the mid-90s and then revised in 2005, I believe. Those guidelines are out there, but they're not universally utilized for infants. And that information is very helpful to the pathologist prior to them performing the autopsy, so they know what may be a concern and what not. So those guidelines are out there right now. Those are ideally captured on the day of the death, when the death investigator goes to the place where the infant or child died and interviews the caregivers and collects that important data. So it would not increase the length of time.
Do you know if local police or other law enforcement authorities support these changes?
I believe in the last legislative session, I know that there was a National Sheriff's Association, I believe, that endorsed the bill. In general, again, the death investigations vary so greatly. In some areas, local law enforcement are the death investigators, and in other areas, they're medical legal death investigators from the medical examiner office or coroner's office doing an investigation in parallel. So it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on how these would be carried out, but the information from law enforcement is very helpful to them in terms of giving them a guidebook of what to follow. As you can imagine, these are emotionally and very chaotic scenes. It's very difficult. It's some of the most difficult investigations that death investigators say they need to respond to, as well as law enforcement, because the scene is completely disturbed by the time they get there. So their ability to effectively interview a distraught parent to get that accurate information of what really happened really takes an important skill set. And that's why the training for these death investigators is so important. It's really a unique, highly skilled ability that they need to have to be able to collect this information and do it in the most compassionate way for the families.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to submit for the record endorsement letters from 24 organizations. This is with regard to the H.R. 669.
Without objection, sir.
And I wanted to mention that, because you mentioned law enforcement and, their support for the bill. And I just wanted to mention that 3 of those in the 24, the National Association of Medical Examiners, the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners, and the Society of Medical Legal Death Investigators are, enforcement, just for your information. Let me ask, let me see, I wanted to start with Ms. Crandall. I don't know if I can get through all these, but I'm going to try. I wanted to thank you again for being here and, sharing the heart-wrenching story about the loss of your daughter, Maria. And in your testimony, you also shared some sobering statistics that over 3,600 infants and 200 toddlers die suddenly each year. You noted that 26,000 women experience stillbirth. Clearly, we need to do something to address this. The Sudden Unexpected Death Data Enhancement Awareness Act that I sponsored contains provisions that will build upon the current CDC activities and ultimately help prevent these deaths from occurring. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that we're in a difficult fiscal climate. As much as I'd like to advance all the provisions in H.R. 669, I recognize that that may not be feasible. So I just wanted to ask you, in light of these constraints, what do you believe are the most important areas or provisions for us to address?
I strongly feel that the most important areas are the comprehensive investigations that would then allow for effective surveillance and then public awareness and intervention strategies. I think if we don't fix the issue of these cases initially being investigated thoroughly, we will never have the good data that will then later on help public health and research, and as well as these families on an individual basis. But there's many efforts going on right now that have huge obstacles in front of them because they're dealing with broken data. I think we need to go back and prioritize the investigations.
All right. Thank you so much, really, again, for your testimony and all your support in getting this moved.